Life Management Science Labs would like to acknowledge that we live and produce this podcast on the traditional lands of the Wurundjeri people. We'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands of our listeners and our international colleagues. We'd like to pay our respects to their elders past, present, and emerging. Hello everyone, and welcome to Wealth Pathways, the Affluence Science Insights podcast produced by LMSL, the Life Management Science Labs. We are champions of life management science, providing structured insights informed by science and inspired by practice on key aspects of conscious living. Each week, we bring you scientific and practical insights on each element with the expert knowledge of professionals in the field. I'm your host, Marie Stella, coming to your ears from Naarm, Melbourne, Australia. Let's learn together.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the show. We are all probably guilty of overspending, and for me personally, I know this is especially true. I'm always seeing things that I want to buy from big fast fashion brands, even though I know they probably have a bad impact on the environment and definitely a bad impact on my savings. So today we're diving into the topic of style and sustainability to find out how we can make smarter decisions when we shop for fashion, and hopefully I can stop buying unnecessary clothes. So today I'm joined by our expert in the field, Dr. Patsy Perry. Patsy is a reader in fashion marketing at Manchester Fashion Institute, Manchester Metropolitan University. Her PhD investigated the management of corporate social responsibility and fashion supply chains. She is an experienced researcher and educator with articles published in multiple journals and chapters in academic textbooks. She is an associate editor of the Journal of Fashion Marketing and Management and has taught internationally in China, Europe, and the Middle East. Her expertise in fashion marketing and sustainability is regularly featured in the international press and media. She has published several academic book chapters and papers in reputable academic journals and has presented her research at academic conferences, including British Academy of Management, Academy of Marketing Science World Marketing Congress, as well as being invited as scientific committee member and peer reviewer for conferences including EuroOMA and Global Fashion Conference. So, with this wealth of knowledge and experience, I'm excited to learn from Patsy today. So, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Sarah. Pleasure to be here.
Of course, it's a pleasure to have you here, and I'm very excited to find out some more about your expertise today. So, just to get us started, can you tell us a bit about your background and what led you to pursue your research in fashion?
Well, I've always loved fashion, dressing up, trying out new looks and trends and styles and, fabrics and colours and so on, watching the catwalks growing up and fashion magazines and so on. So that kind of led me to later on to do my PhD. So when I started my PhD, well, nearly 20 years ago now, I was interested in the increasing reports of exploitation in supply chains. So although we see the glamorous side of fashion, the fantastic retail that we're surrounded by, and so on, but we don't always have that understanding of what's happening in the supply chain as the clothing is being made, and some of the poor working conditions that the people that make our clothes are subjected to. So I was interested in, really unpacking that supply chain and trying to understand what was going wrong and, understanding how manufacturers can support better working conditions when they're, having to deal with cost and time pressures to deliver orders of garments for retailers and brands that they're working with. So that's what led me into, the subject of what is the cost, the environmental and the social cost of fashion, I guess now. And more recently, I've been, researching about the environmental cost, the pollution, carbon footprint, and textile waste issues that come with, the growth of fast fashion and the fact that we're producing more clothing than ever before and buying more clothing than we ever have done at any time in history before.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's so different to the glitz and glamour that we really think about when we think about fashion. It seems like you've gone into some really interesting research about, the behind the scenes and what they don't show you. So I'm excited to unpack that a little bit today and, the environmental stuff mostly. So what do you think is a big misconception about the fashion industry?
I think that the biggest misconception is like where clothing is actually made, and the length of the supply chain, the geographical nature, and all of the different processes of transformation that the raw materials go through before ultimately we start off in agriculture or in petrochemicals, either things being grown in the field or coming from the oil industry, and then we make either synthetic materials such as your polyesters, and so on, nylon for athleisure wear, gym gear, and so on, or your cottons from cotton plants, animal fibers such as silk and wool, and so on. So I don't think people always understand just how much work goes into making clothing and how many different types of people and organizations are involved, from that's inception in the field all the way through to making the textiles, producing the fabric, and then sewing the garment pieces together, and so on, distributing them and getting them either sold online or into retail shops. And I think the appreciation of the extensive amount of work that is done and the extensive amount of people that are involved. And then sometimes we buy things on a whim, impulse purchasing. We've all been guilty of it, and then we might decide not even to wear it before we then dispose of it, or just wear it once and dispose of it. So it's an incredible waste of all of the resources, the time, and people's efforts that have been involved along those different stages of the process to make the final garment.
Yeah. It's amazing to think about, how many people have actually been involved, how many processes has this actually gone through, from agriculture to distribution, like you said. You just don't even think about when you just go shopping, you just kind of look around and see what you like, but you've got no idea what's going on in the background. So that's a fantastic introduction to what we're going to talk about today. But before we do that, I want to do a little Have You Met Patsy segment. So just want to go through some kind of icebreaker questions. First of all, are there some books that you've enjoyed recently?
A couple of books I'm going to talk about that I've enjoyed recently, which is really on topic for this, is
Hmm.
a book called Less by Patrick Grant. So Patrick Grant is a British businessman who's got a brand called Community Clothing in the north of England. He's also got Savile Row businesses in London, and his idea was, how can we make ethical fashion better, preserved jobs in the UK, preserve those skills which have often gone through several generations and so on, but be able to make good things well, that are not too expensive, so that people can engage with that. So, and he's written this book which is all about how can we be satisfied with less stuff, so which is exactly what we should be thinking about for fashion and how to transform the industry. So we really need to slow down, but I think over time we have got increasingly used to being presented with much more stuff and being encouraged to buy more stuff. And often we don't really think about what do we actually need and why are we purchasing things. So he talks about how we can live a good life well and be satisfied with less things, and really try and develop some kind of attachment to the things that we own, not just clothing, but also maybe household items as well. But I'm going to focus on the clothing, and I think that's something that we've forgotten about now. He talks about during a long time ago in history, people wouldn't even have access to new clothes. So unless you were very wealthy, there's no way you'd be wearing brand new clothes. It would all be hand-me-downs. You might only have a few items in your wardrobe that would last you the whole year. And if we fast forward to today, and the vast amount of clothing that people have nowadays, and it's quite normal, nobody would bat an eyelid if you say you went shopping for new clothes every week, or if you're buying online every week. That's completely normal now, isn't it, in our culture? But if we think back, that was never what happened then. So people had much less stuff, but they had other things going on in their lives, such as their work, their kind of personal relationships, and so on, and people were kind of closer to nature, all of that really good stuff. So it's kind of thinking, how can we develop attachment to things, choose things well, buy less stuff, but also look after the things that we own, and feel happy in what we have. And I think there's a lot of sense in that, thinking about how can we come off this incessant cycle of consumption on such a frequent basis, which is at the heart of fast fashion, and how can we develop that attachment to our clothing, so we don't just want to wear it once, or we're happy to take the time to look after it, wear it and rewear it, repair it, and so on. So that's been a really interesting book. And then the other book that I read a little while ago was by Aja Barber, which again is a really great book. It's called Consumed. So it's all about, understanding what is the backstory, the behind the scenes around the exploitation that happens in the fashion industry to bring us this ever changing, dizzying array of new fast fashion, and how that's kind of linked to kind of colonialism, climate change, and so on, and also what we can do to kind of try and step off this cycle of incessant consumption, which isn't really good for the people that are involved in making it, the planet, or ultimately, the consumers. So I think you can end up, as she says, being kind of trapped by fast fashion. So although you think, why are you buying it? It's not because you need it, but you may be buying it because, you want to fit in, or you want to be on trend with everybody else, or you buy it to cheer yourself up, or you're a bit, down or something because it's so cheap and you want a little, lift me up and so on. So there's lots of reasons why we might buy cheap, clothing, fast fashion, but it's rarely because we actually need it. I think if she says, if we step back, reflect, and think, what is this bringing us? And ultimately, it's not always bringing lots of benefits to the consumer either. So although people, that are making it and the planet is being exploited and ravaged and so on, but sometimes it's also the consumer, that is not always a great thing for us. It's like having too much sugary chocolate cake, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's too much choice as well. You just go into a shop and you get overwhelmed by what on earth is going on, and I want everything and how much can I afford? It's overwhelming to go shopping sometimes these days.
It really
For
is. Yeah.
sure.
I mean, if you go on most websites now, there'll be hundreds, if not thousands, of different options to choose from. And really, how many can a human being process?
Yeah.
It's overwhelming, unmanageable, isn't it? So how do you even make that choice of what you want to buy?
Yeah, and it's confusing if you haven't looked at your wardrobe previous to going shopping and think, what do I actually need? Or I think I want a brown shirt, but I really like this purple shirt, and I don't know anymore. So you gotta sort of do your research. But I also wanted to ask you, thank you for sharing your books. They sound really interesting. Do you have a movie that you've enjoyed recently?
It's not recently, but I do have a movie, and this was, this is a monumental documentary, really. So it's 10 years old now. The movie
Hmm.
is a documentary called The True Cost. So I'd highly recommend that. I've seen it many times myself. I've shown it to my students and so on. But it's really, it was the first movie, which is still very current now, that kind of exposed the different stages of what happens in a fashion supply chain between the raw material and bringing those, lovely products into nice stores for the consumer. And it goes all around the world to understand, what those different processes are. So that was really enlightening for me. And in terms of, the cotton farmers that are involved, the garment workers that are making the clothes and so on. And also increasingly the other end of post-consumer in terms of the textile waste and what happens to that, and all those different global connections between, what we buy, where it comes from, how it's made, and then also when it ends up once we dispose of it. So I would thoroughly recommend that. And even though it's 10 years old now, I'd say, in a way, nothing much has changed. But it also showcases some good practice as well. So, different brands and people that are trying to make things better, and, really connecting with their supplier base, and understanding, working with the people that are making it, and, trying to make fewer better things.
Mm. Interesting. Okay, that's a great recommendation. And my next question for you is, do you have a role model, either personally or professionally?
I would probably say that the classes that I have taught myself has really helped me to try and understand, all of the research that I've been doing, and how I can then transfer that and spread the word and kind of
Mm.
share that with my students. And obviously, I've been teaching around this area for around probably 15 years now. And I think when I was first starting out, a lot of this wasn't known. So, the students that I would in my class, they wouldn't all know everything about, what was bad about fast fashion and so on. But I find that over time, there is that much more greater awareness within, the younger generations, but also just general mainstream. I feel like, fashion sustainability, it has really moved into the mainstream now, which is great. It's not just, an academic research area or something for businesses to talk about, but it's kind of, everybody, people on the street are much more aware of that now. So it's been really inspiring to see that transformation over those years, to see that greater knowledge, greater awareness, and people questioning, why we do things the way we do. And also I've been really inspired by my students, and when they've come up with with their project ideas for new business models or new ways of doing things, or a new brand or whatever that could be doing things better. And I think that's always really inspiring, isn't it? So how you can take your knowledge and kind of share that with the next generation, but also seeing how they're taking that knowledge to work with and what they're coming back with. I think that's been really inspiring, because that is what it's all about, isn't it? How we can change the business model for the better, and also not lose the creativity and all the the glamour of fashion and so on, but how can we do things better, and what sort of good practices could come through that are going to be appealing to consumers, but also ensure that we're doing things in the proper way for people and planet.
That's great. And that's perfect, because we're going to move on now to our topic for today about style and sustainability. So I want to get started with just a few, basic terms and understanding for the podcast that might, come up again and again. So my first question for you is, what does affluence mean to you?
This is a really interesting question, and it's really made me think about this, because we would typically associate affluence with having lots of something, wouldn't we? So,
Mm,
lots of money that you can then go and buy lots of material goods and engage in consumption and conspicuous consumption and kind of show off your status and your wealth and so on. But I think for this topic, and we found that that's not necessarily the way that we want to move forward. It's not always healthy for a society, let alone for individuals. But I think really for me, in this context, affluence is being satisfied with less, so having that financial freedom, because you're not trapped by this ever increasing speed of consumption frequency, and buying lots and lots of things that you don't need, that ultimately they're not going to make you happy, because that's not what makes people happy, is it? And
mm,
ultimately you could find that you're and we've seen evidence of this, and even from my own reflections for myself, you can end up trapped in this cycle of consumption, where over time you're actually spending a fairly significant amount of money on things that you don't need, you don't end up wearing, or you might just wear once and they end up consigned to the wardrobe, which becomes overwhelming to manage in itself. And actually, if we stepped away from that, although it's difficult, then you could find that more financial freedom, that you're able to do better things with your income or disposable income, and not just kind of giving it all to fast fashion brands. So
mm.
affluence really is about that financial freedom and not being trapped in that cycle of consumption, which we now know that has many negative consequences for people. And people have
Yeah.
even gotten into debt. You've got these buy now, pay later schemes and so on, which sound
Mm,
great. But, if we're using those and potentially getting into debt, which is then going to affect our credit rating, and you can't do other stuff that you might want to do, like get a mortgage or whatever, buy a car and so on, because you bought lots of small amounts of fast fashion, which over time cumulatively do add up into quite significant sums.
yeah, that cycle is exactly what I was trying to refer to at the start of the podcast, when I was saying fast fashion has a bad impact on my savings, because I just keep going shopping and I keep wanting to buy more and more, because it's so exciting, and it can be
Yeah.
fun to go shopping with your friends or whatever. But I think that's a really thoughtful answer about affluence. So thank you for sharing that. It's definitely made you think, and I think that's kind of the point of asking about affluence, and tying it to the topic of conversation that we have on this podcast, because it can be it can be different depending on what we're talking about. So I'm glad that yeah, you've shared such an insightful answer there. And so to kind of continue this, what do you think is the relationship between fashion and affluence?
Well, fashion has been used typically, and over time as well. In history, we can look back in historical times. Fashion is used to signify status, to signify wealth. I mean, like back in the day, historically, it would be the men that would be more, engaged with fashion, and they would wear more kind of ostentatious clothing to signify their position in society if they were of that class and so on. Whereas I think nowadays, if you look at the industry, it's mostly geared towards women's wear. But fashion is often the first thing that people would use to kind of signify their wealth. And we look at the success of brands and kind of logo culture and so on, and what people would go through to buy that that whatever pair of trainers from that season, or design a handbag and so on. So it's very much used to to signify status, but also to kind of help ourselves to kind of be who we want to be, perhaps, and help us to look as to what we want to aspire to in society.
Yeah, absolutely. I love hearing about the history of a topic, and fashion definitely has a really rich history and rich culture. So that's a great answer. How do you think that an individual's level of affluence influences their spending habits on fashion?
Well, usually, if you've got more disposable income, it would normally be associated with greater levels of consumption. So, if we look at the research about, where for example, the carbon footprint is highest, it tends to be with, the richer parts of the society and richer parts of the world, rather than the developing world, where people, don't have much income, so they can't really engage in consumerism, flying all around the world, buying a big car and all of that kind of stuff, which sounds very appealing, doesn't it? But it leads to a greater carbon footprint. So generally, if you think about affluence in terms of disposable income and that kind of wealth, it would tend to lead down the path of greater levels of materialistic consumption. But I think in many parts of the world now, we're kind of moving on from that and thinking that actually consumerism, material goods, does not make us happy. It's not great for well-being. Often you can get trapped in this cycle of trying to keep up with trends and follow what other people are doing, and really it's not a very mindful way to find that route to well-being. So I
Mm,
think sometimes you can think about, well, if I do have, lots of disposable income, what else could I spend my money on? So could I, have some experiences with friends? Could I take up a new skill or a hobby, or learn something new that's going to be, better for my well-being, rather than just giving all my money to companies to buy lots more stuff and end up with,
mm,
in the case of fashion, this sort of overwhelming wardrobe. And we found now that there is some research coming out that because it's so easy to add to your wardrobe and buy frequently, you end up with this overwhelming amount of stuff. You don't actually know what's in your wardrobe, so you can't always think to put an outfit together from what you already have. But then it's so much easier to just go and buy something new, isn't it, in a way,
yeah.
than rather go and get something dry cleaned or have it repaired or kind of put an outfit together. And we've even seen stories in the media about people just buying a whole new holiday wardrobe from fast fashion
Yep.
company and then just leaving it at the holiday destination because it's such low
Mm,
value. They had a whole
yeah.
suitcase full of brand new gear, but they don't need to come home with it because it's worthless, isn't it?
Yeah.
So yeah, so that's
Mm.
kind of it's worrying, isn't it? Because when we look back to how many people have been involved in all the different processes in kind of making those items from raw material to finished product, it is an awful lot of waste, isn't it?
Absolutely. That's really interesting. I would like to kind of move into the style side of things now. I mean, like you were saying, sometimes we just think it's easier to just go out and buy something instead of looking through our wardrobes and really seeing how can we make this work. How do you think that people on a budget can still achieve a personal style or even keep up with fashion trends?
Yeah, I think budget is it does dictate to a certain extent, what you can what you can engage with. But I think because trends nowadays are just so fast and they are, a dizzying speed really, but it's hard to know, what is in this season, isn't it? And often, once you get to a certain age, you kind of remember, oh, that was already in a few years ago. I might have something like that in my wardrobe in the case
Yeah.
of myself. So I think it's not necessarily dictated by how much money you have, because there is so many different avenues now. And certainly in the UK, for example, we have a fantastic charity shop network, which has been very well established for decades now. So it's really easy if you're in urban or sometimes even in a more rural area in the UK, you can very easily find options to shop secondhand. In many places now, we have things like repair cafes. We have clothes swap events, so you can go along, take some items from your wardrobe that you don't want to wear anymore, you kind of hand them in, get some tokens back, and then you can pick something else from whatever things other people have donated. So it's a really great way to refresh your wardrobe, get rid of what you don't want anymore, bring some newness in, but you're not actually buying new stuff from a fast fashion retailer. And also those events tend to be more social, more community based. So I think we're also looking at how can we, bring people together a bit more, rather than, it's so easy now to just sit at home by yourself, doom scrolling on your phone, looking at all these options from fast fashion brands, but it's not really very sociable compared to, I remember when I was a lot younger, you'd go out shopping on a Saturday afternoon with your friends. It would be a social activity. But I think shopping online, just endlessly scrolling and ordering and putting things in your basket, it's not really a sociable activity, is it? So it can be,
No.
it's not the positive things in society. But I think if you are on a budget, the best thing we can do environmentally is keep wearing what we've already got. So we cannot shop our way to sustainability. It is certainly not about buying more stuff. And we hear a lot, don't we? And lots of research, consumer research, that suggests that people think people would like to buy more ethical, more sustainable fashion, but they feel that the price of what they perceive the price of those options to be are unaffordable for them. But I think, from my perspective, it's a bit provocative, but I say, it's not about shopping your way to sustainability, because you could buy a beautiful item that is made in a very sustainable way, but you could still wear it once and throw it away. So it's also about our usage of the item and how we take care of it, how we wear it and rewear it, and so on. So, you might even find something from a fast fashion brand in a charity store that is really great for your figure, your lifestyle, your budget, and so on, and you can make that work for you. And I've had, I always remember one of my students say to me once, she found something from a fast fashion store in a charity shop, but she wears it a lot. It's like a great jumpsuit, it's really nice quality. So it's not always about spending lots of money, is it? It's sometimes about relooking what we have in our wardrobe, maybe getting a friend or somebody to come and have a look at your wardrobe with you and give you some inspiration. Because sometimes it's easiest for somebody else to tell us, I think that looks really great on you, that really suits you, rather than us trying to figure out what suits us. And you could even employ the services of a stylist, so I've seen that kind of bubbling up a little bit, where people will do kind of wardrobe advice and help people. That can be done online over a video call, doesn't have to be done in person, and just really help people to make sense of what they've got and what works for them, their lifestyle, their figure, their colouring, and so on.
Interesting.
So now that I work in a fashion school, so some of my colleagues are fashion stylists, and I find that fascinating, because it's not something that I've ever engaged with. But they just know, they've got a great eye for things. They know what would work well together and what would suit different people. And I think sometimes nowadays, as we've spoken, there's such an overwhelming volume of options that it's really hard to process and figure out. And I'm sure we've all been guilty of it, haven't we? Buying things that are not suitable for our lifestyle, our figures and colouring and so on, but you buy it because you think it's on trend and all the influencers are wearing it and so on. But we really need to go back and think, well, what suits me? And it might not be that colour that's in season now. but I need to
Absolutely.
wear things that I look good and I feel good in. And, sometimes it helps to get that advice or a little bit of guidance from an expert.
Yeah.
And it's not about buying more stuff.
No, I love what you've said about the clothes swap with the tokens. That sounds amazing. I've never been to one of those. I would love to. Something similar that we have here is there's a secondhand clothes shop that I think every few months they have like a warehouse sale, and everyone floods to this warehouse because everything's under $10. And it's just like, I don't know, maybe things that they don't usually have in the store, or it's just cheaper. It's a massive warehouse. And I've been there. I think I've only been once, but it was everybody goes there. It gets pretty packed because it's so cheap. So it's definitely a good idea with the tokens. I think that sounds really fun.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes our students organise it on campus as well. So,
Mm,
yeah, so I think you could set something up or even do an informal one with friends and family.
yeah, for
So
sure.
yeah, one of my students started this up in the community where she lives, where they'd never done that before. So, and she found that the people in her community they'd never heard of this idea before, but they came along open minded, gave it a go, and came away and said, "Yeah, it's a brilliant idea, and also it's nice to get together with people, isn't it?" Because it
Mm,
tends to be more of a relaxed, sociable atmosphere rather than going into a retail store where you've got the staff, looking at you and so on. But sometimes the
yeah.
clothes swaps can be quite nice, community driven, relaxed. You could have a cup of tea or whatever, donate some money for charity. Usually there'd be like a small entrance fee to pay. And then sometimes
Mm.
that some of that or all of that would go to charity as well. So it's kind of double win, really, isn't it?
Yeah, for sure. I also loved what you said about getting a stylist or just getting somebody else's opinion on your wardrobe, because I did
Yeah.
this like some years ago now with my mum, because she was like, I need to clear out like so much of my wardrobe. And then I came in and I was saying, oh, this looks good with that. And she was like, I would never have considered those two things to go together. So now I might. And then she can wear things again that she thought she didn't have anything to wear them with, or, wear it more often. So that's a good idea as well, just to get another opinion in to sort of refresh how you're thinking about what you already own. For sure.
Absolutely. And also,
Mm,
looking at, I often get my inspiration just not so much from social media, but just like seeing what people are wearing in the street, or I might see somebody in the street and think, wow, really like that
mm,
outfit or that piece of whatever jacket or whatever that they're wearing. And I think, yeah, kind of looking up and looking at what's around us can also give you some inspiration rather than just, mindlessly scrolling on your phone and getting trends from
yeah.
there.
Yeah. Well, you've already given us so much advice about what we can do to kind of reduce the impact, reduce the waste. What are the environmental and also the ethical implications of high clothing expenditure among wealthier people, for example? And how does, affluence kind of shape their choices?
Well, generally, when people are more affluent in terms of having more disposable income, they would tend to, trade up their options, upgrade their options rather, and buy more expensive things, which then leads us into kind of designer brands, luxury fashion, and so on. But that's not in environmental terms. It's not really so much of the problem because when clothing is more expensive and it's better quality, often it would tend to have a longer useful life. Unlike fast fashion, when we find it's kind of worn once or not worn at all, and then
Mm,
disposed of or binned. But with your higher end pieces, they would tend to circulate, so they're suitable for resale. So we see luxury consignments, business models, which can be online or it can be in a physical store, where you can go and buy, secondhand luxury fashion at a fraction of the price. Sometimes it's not even been worn. So same as
mm,
a thrift store with fast fashion items not even being worn before they're disposed of. So it's less of the problem because there will always be a market for that, and often it might be exported to different parts of the world as well. And then we have, the idea of vintage fashion, which again is really appealing to certain customer segments and certain parts of the world. So they would be particularly looking for, pieces from, 10, 20 or more years ago. And vintage fashion is a great way to see just how long, clothing can last. So
mm.
it was certainly something that I was interested in when I was younger, and I used to go to these vintage markets and so on. I'll still go now occasionally and
Mm.
see things from like the 1970s or the 1980s that really appealed, and you can kind of mix them up with your wardrobe. And often, designers nowadays will look back to previous times and take some inspiration from that. So what can be better than finding the original piece that's in still good condition to be suitable to be worn today? So I think that
Interesting.
side of things is less problematic, because the clothes are made generally with greater care and made to be more durable, and they will have that value attached to them, so they can recirculate and so on. They're not likely to end up, on a beach in the southern hemisphere, posing a problem to communities, wildlife, and nature.
Yeah. Well, this is really interesting. We've kind of touched now on, the more budget items and what people can do when they're on a budget, and also the higher end fashion. How would you recommend people organize their spending on fashion, or take fashion in account when they're organizing their budget, taking into consideration what we've discussed so far?
Yeah, that's a really good question as well. And I'd go back to what we were talking about. It's not always about buying more stuff, isn't it? But when you're thinking about your budget, it could be a good investment to think, might I need to go and get some things repaired that are in my wardrobe?
Mm,
We have lost repair skills over time. So, some decades ago, it would have been a normal part of household maintenance that you'd kind of darn socks or fix
mm,
a hem or whatever. But I feel that, and there is evidence to say that those kind of normal household skills have gone, and generally
mm,
people would need to kind of ask the grandmother or maybe ask their mother to do it for them, because we don't really teach it in schools anymore, and so on. So you have to then pay a professional to have it done, which can be quite expensive. So that's where we get the problem, that it's cheaper to just buy something new than go and have something repaired or dry cleaned or whatever. But in recent years, it's been really interesting to see that we've mobile apps have been set up. A few examples in the UK market is the Seam and also Sojo. So these are apps that connect people that need something fixing, or that would like maybe have something to be made bespoke for them, with people in their local community who can do that for them. So it's a different option than kind of going to a professional repair shop on the high street. But there might be, people in your community that have those tailoring skills, that it's not their, it's not their profession, but they can do that for you. So I think that's really exciting, isn't it? Because nowadays with multiculturalism, there's people coming in from all over the world that might have come in from certain countries or regions where they have more of those skills, and then they're able to fix something for you in the community, which is not going to break the bank. And that could be a better investment than just buying something cheap that's brand new. So I think
mm,
thinking about maintenance of our wardrobes and keeping things in good condition, which might sometimes involve dry cleaning or repairing, or even thinking about how we could get a better deal by buying something that's second hands from different options. Certainly in the UK, the city where I live, we've got everything from your sort of kilo thrift sale to
mm,
your luxury consignments and everything in between. So no matter what your budget or what your tastes and preferences are, there is ways for you to engage in secondhand shopping, which again is great because we're making more use of things that are already in existence rather than fueling production of brand new items.
mm.
So I'd say
Interesting.
for your budget, thinking about, not necessarily buying new things, but how might you use some of that budget for maintaining your wardrobe and keeping it in good condition. And also thinking how could you engage somehow perhaps with buying something that's already in existence through secondhand shopping models.
Yeah, fantastic. Great advice. Well, today we have talked about the vicious cycle of consumption, which has been really interesting and very concerning. But how do you think we can slow down consumption?
Well, yeah, that is the $1 million question, isn't it? How can we slow
Yeah.
down consumption? So we just need to buy fewer, better things, But it's really hard to do that when you're constantly faced with a barrage of, marketing messages, social media influencers saying, here's the shiny new thing. You must have this season. Buy something new, upgrade your wardrobe, update your wardrobe, and so on. So it's really hard to kind of detach from that cycle of constant
Yeah.
consumption. But ultimately, that's all we need to do, and the couple of books I referred to earlier by Patrick Grant and Adja Barber, so they talk about, just buy fewer better things, or, shop local, shop independent. You don't have to, shop from these massive global brands that are, they're not really doing what we would consider to be best practice. But is there kind of more local models you can do? And then the money that you're spending is going back into that community, and it's supporting people to do things better, which is exactly what we should be doing, rather than just fueling, a faceless brand that's kind of, exploiting people and planet in its operations. So ultimately, we just need to buy fewer better things. But with all that comes with, we almost need to do an analysis of ourselves and, what suits us, what our lifestyle is, and then how we can, put together an outfit from what we've already got, which would then help us to slow down rather than just, automatically reaching for a mobile app and just buying something new because it's easier than kind of going into that wardrobe and trying to sort things out and thinking what needs fixing or repairing, or what needs dry cleaning, or how could I put something that I bought this year with something that's 5 years old to make a new outfit, and so on. That all takes time, doesn't it? And it's often a lot easier in today's modern life, isn't it, and convenient to just click and buy something new, and it's there the next day or the same day sometimes.
Yeah, it really is. Well, I want to wrap up sort of this chunk of the podcast with one last question, which is, are there any resources available that you think people should look into that might help them make more sustainable choices?
I think there is a wealth of resources nowadays. There's lots of books about sustainable fashion now, if you want to, be better informed and really understand, how things are made and what some of the issues are around that. And also another person that I know, so another book that I read recently written by sustainable fashion journalist that's local in the northwest of England. So she's written a book about sustainable fashion. And although there are tons of books about sustainable fashion, what's different about her book, and her name is Sophie Benson. So she's written a book that talks about, the issues around how fashion is produced and the exploitation, but it's also got lots of tips for how you can kind of fix things easily, even if you don't have, extensive repair skills, or, how you can upcycle something. So make something better out of something that you've already got. So it's a combination of kind of the information, but also the practical aspects of what you could do to make a difference, rather than having to pay somebody to fix something for you. So I think that's a really interesting angle, isn't it? Because sometimes we just need some of that practical advice and guidance, and not just the information about why it's bad and so on, but how can we do better. And I think there's loads of, sustainable fashion influencers nowadays on all the social media platforms that are kind of showcasing, smaller brands or brands that are doing something a little bit differently. So I think it is possible to cut through all that noise of more fast fashion, more shiny new things, and kind of seek out some guidance around, how you can restyle your wardrobe, or, what more sustainable brands you might engage with. But also it's not all, as I said, it's not just about buying new, but what's also happening in other parts of the world. And with my job, it's quite international. I meet a lot of people from various countries. Sometimes I'll travel and so on, so I think it's really helpful to kind of look at other cultures and other countries, and learn from some of their best practice. And often I think that sustainable fashion is quite like a new concept in probably Western countries I would group together. But in other, some Asian countries, they've been doing this for generations and generations in a way, but they don't call it sustainable fashion. So I've been really inspired by, going to India and meeting people from India, and they have this wonderful tradition called chindi, which is really making use of of textiles in the home. So, if something's not good enough to be worn anymore, which could be a sari or whatever, they'll then rip it up into rags and make home textiles with it. And you might have seen these rag rugs, these beautifully coloured rag rugs that you see. So that's part of that chindi tradition
Yeah.
of really making use of something until there's no more further use of it at all.
Yeah.
Whereas I think we've kind of forgotten that because we don't really do that. I don't think we do that in the UK. It's not
No.
part of our culture at all, is it? So I think that's really interesting, isn't it? So how we can make use of things beyond their first iteration as a garment, but what else could that
Yeah.
piece become? It could become a cushion cover or a rug for in the home or a lampshade or whatever. And also, I think looking at Japanese visible mending techniques as well, which have become quite a thing on Instagram as well. So shashiko, so it's kind of celebrating the history of the garment and not trying to hide the fact that it has been repaired. And some of these can be very beautiful, very creative, and really intricate. And I think it's interesting to look at that. And they do with all sorts of things, like a piece of pottery that's broken, they might repair it with some gold. So you're not trying to hide the repair, but you're celebrating the repair and saying, this is worth repairing.
Yeah.
So I think
I've seen
it's so
that.
interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's so
Yeah.
interesting to look, at what's happening around the world and how people are doing this. And the same in, places in sub-Saharan Africa that import our textile waste. So often in those markets, there'll be a whole network of artisans and tailors that are like fixing things, upcycling things. So the stuff that's imported that may or may not be fit for purpose, but they will really try their hardest to kind of maximize the value of what that piece is, either by repairing it or upcycling it and making a bit more appealing for another life with another customer there. So I think, kind of sharing experiences, and if you've got any kind of, international neighbours or, people in your community, it's interesting to hear. I find it fascinating to hear what people do in other parts of the world, because often none of this is new. But sometimes if we look back at history, that can really help us think how we can take it forward to the future.
Yeah. That is fantastic ideas. So many interesting cultures and history that we can learn from. And I think that's really important. I want to move now to our practices and habits segment, which is where I simply want to ask you if you think there's a habit that you would recommend people practicing to help make better spending decisions when they're shopping for clothes.
I think we just need to stop shopping for clothes, really, don't we?
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's kind of maybe deleting some apps and, setting aside a little bit of time every week to think, right, I'm going to go to my wardrobe, my existing wardrobe, and see if I can, make some sense of it or have a bit of a clear out, a spring clean. It doesn't just have to be in springtime, does it? But maybe it's something that we need to do more regularly on a fortnightly basis, perhaps. And or some people do this principle of one in, one out. So if you want to buy something new, you have to get rid of something, otherwise you're just like adding to this overwhelming mountain of stuff that you can't really process in the wardrobe. So really kind of thinking, do I really need this item, or is there something else that I already have that could serve the purpose? So kind of putting aside a little bit of regular time, I think, for kind of maintenance of the wardrobe. I mean, there's never enough time, is there? But I think it can it can be beneficial in terms of making that wardrobe less overwhelming to think about and process, and also to kind of remind yourself what's in there and things that you might have forgotten about because you've been so busy buying lots of new stuff that you've forgotten what you've actually got, which might be better than the new stuff that's coming in.
Yeah, I've recently started doing the one in, one out theory, and I think it's working because it sort of shows me that, like, if I buy a new jumper, there must be one that I don't like or one that I don't want to wear anymore, or it doesn't go with anything. So I've obviously needed to buy something new. So it sort of lets me have a look again at my wardrobe and go, okay, well, mum and I are going shopping this weekend and mum wants some new jumpers for this reason, or I want some new jumpers for this reason. Let me have a look and see if that's a valid reason. Is there some things I need to get rid of or something like that? So it definitely helps for sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I'd now like to move. We're kind of coming up to wrapping up our episode here, and this is our open mic segment. So this is kind of your chance to talk about anything you're passionate about. If there's something that we haven't touched on yet today, or something completely unrelated to the topic, the floor is completely yours.
I mean, the only thing that we haven't touched on, which maybe I'd like to go back to, is although we need to make use of what we've already got, we cannot get away from the fact or deny that ultimately we will need to dispose of clothing eventually. So it's kind of, what are those different options for what can we do when we don't want our clothes anymore? And what are the more, ethical ways of disposing of them and what happens to them after that? So I think, like in the UK, as I said, we have fantastic, well-established charity store networks. So people are very comfortable. They know if they can take, if they live close-ish to one, they can take things there. But there's also other options. So if you don't live next to a charity shop, you might have, I've seen now we have like neighborhood groups on, for example, on Facebook or on WhatsApp where people will kind of donate clothes. And it's great, it might be children's clothes that they've grown out of, or it might be they can then connect with people that are maybe coming in as refugees that haven't got anything, or people that are escaping domestic violence and have had to like leave with a bag and their kids and whatever, and they're starting again. And there's always people that need stuff, isn't there? You don't always realize, and they're just right there in your community. So I think social media is great for that. So making these kind of neighborhood groups where people can swap and share and offload things that they don't want anymore that might be useful to somebody else, because you just never know. You might not want it, but somebody else might be really grateful for it. So I think it's thinking about where you can dispose of things. And then the main thing to remember is that when we are donating clothes, they've got to be clean and dry. So, because nobody is going to be able to process wet or dirty clothes, whether you're talking about, recycling them, textile recycling, which there isn't a lot of. But for any kind of reuse options, they've got to be in a fit state. So I think just remembering that, isn't it? Although there might be rubbish and not needed anymore, but as long as they're kind of clean and dry, then a charity would be able to sell them on, or or export them, or find them a new home somewhere else if they're in that good condition. And just generally keeping clothing out of the household waste bin. So it should never be in the bin really going to landfill, because there's always something that you can do with it. And certainly here in the UK, there's even the charities that will accept things that are damaged, because even if they cannot sell them in that state to customers in the shop, they will kind of collect them all together and then sell them as rags to a rag merchant, who would then sell it on to a textile recycler and so on. So the charity will still get some money for it. So I think it's also a myth, perhaps not well understood, that there is value in things, even if they're not perfect, because either somebody will be happy to buy it and fix it, or they can sell it on to other kinds of, segments of the trade that will be able to make use out of them. But we should never really put things in the household waste bin that's going to go to the landfill site.
Yeah,
But
there's
keep
better
things
options
in circulation.
Yeah. Excellent. Well, that's fantastic advice. And you've shared such amazing information with us on this episode. Now that we're coming to the end, I wanted to ask, if our listeners want to find out more about you and your work, where can they go?
Well, I've got lots of academic publications, but they're not always easily accessible, because some of them might sit behind a paywall. But I've also written some kind of general short form public facing articles. So I wrote one a few years ago about the environmental impacts of fashion, and that really took off and went viral. And then I've written another one more recently about the implications of returning goods that you've bought online and what happens to them. And often, if you buy things online, they might go straight to landfill if you return them, if they're fast fashion and so on. So I can share links to those articles, because it is quite eye-opening. And certainly for myself, when I was writing them and researching them, I did learn a lot myself from writing those articles. They're short form, so they're not very long to read, but it just gives you a little bit more insight about some of the kind of murky behind the scenes things that, you don't really think about when you're shopping and returning goods, or, what sort of goods that you're buying. So there's those. And then I have my staff profile on my university website with all the links to the other academic research stuff that I've done.
Yeah. Fantastic. Well, I'll make sure all of those things are linked in our show notes so that our listeners can just click right there and they'll be able to find you and what you've been doing and the amazing work. So I just wanted to say thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate you coming on the show and sharing your expertise and on such a really important topic. So thank you.
My pleasure. Great chatting to you, Sarah. Thank you.
Amazing. And to our audience, I hope that you have learnt a lot from Patsy today, just as I have, and we'll see you in the next episode.
You've been listening to Wealth Pathways, the Affluence Science Insights podcast produced by LMSL, the Life Management Science Labs. More episodes are available from 10 life management perspectives and can be found by searching LMSL on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, and other podcasting apps available on your devices. If you enjoyed this episode, please rate, share, and subscribe to our channel so that other people can find it and we can continue to provide quality content. More of our work can be found on our website at affluence.lifemanagementsciencelabs.com, where you can join our movement. I'm Marie Stella. Thanks for tuning in.